You're listening to Closing Market Weekly, the show where real estate closings meet real world insight. With your host, Phillip Hogan. And every week we break down the trends, tools, and the timing that keeps deals moving forward. Let's dive in. Hi, I'm Phillip Hogan, the host of Closing Market Weekly and the CEO of Signing Services of America. And oh my goodness, last episode, I alluded to something that I'm working on, a major project, and I just couldn't wait to come back and begin talking about it or continue talking about it in this week's episode. And so last week I mentioned and I announced that I am the author of a book titled Relentless Excellence, a story of family, business building, and value leadership. And so I want to continue to share with you some of the special moments of writing this book and the experiences that I hope you will enjoy by becoming a member of our club and possibly in purchase the book. The book concept really started with a simple gesture that turned into something I had no idea from the onset it would actually happen. Well, you remember last episode I told you how I had been approached to become a guest on various podcast shows. And I did 30 shows with this company that hired or that recruited the various shows for me to be on. And so, we're moving on. But somewhere in 2025, I was contacted by a representative from another show to become a guest on the show. I said, sure, great, why not? Well, in the conversation, I like talking, so we got to talking about some other things, and he mentioned to me, this gentleman that is, mentioned to me not only could I be a guest on his show, but also that have I ever thought about writing a book? At that point, I says, no, I had not. And, then he also says, well, have you ever thought about having your own website? I says, no, I haven't. He says, well, you ought to think about it because, we're a publishing company and that we can help you with those kind of goals. So I later, sat down and thought about it, right? And what I thought about was, the opportunities to really, build a legacy by having a book, and then also to create a marketing plan, if you will, for Signing Services of America. And then, of course, my show, Closing Market Weekly. So as the more I thought about it, I said, you know what, Phillip, at 68, right? Why not? Why not jump in? Why not jump in and give it everything you have to something that you've never done that could be something that would be one of the best things that could happen for you? And so somewhere in maybe the beginning of July, I decided to go for it. And so the process of writing Relentless Excellence begun. And it has been a wonderful process of writing, working with publishers, and all the other individuals that are involved with producing a book. It's an enormous undertaking, right? It required, a tremendous amount of my time and a tremendous amount of concentration and a tremendous amount of commitment, and not only commitment to me, but also commitment to other members of the publishing team that were assigned to me. But it was all worth it. And I think that you too will find it to be worthwhile because I talk about or I write about a number of attributes that I have acquired through my brief time on earth. And one of the things that I write about is that I grew up in Hempstead, Long Island, and I am a New Yorker, and I lived in Long Island. My family and I lived in Long Island in the 60s and 70s. And at that time, Hempstead was a very premier place to live. And it was a special place for me because that was sort of like the cocoon that I grew up in, that I lived in, that existed of constant excellence. Everywhere I looked, there was excellence in my household, in my neighbor's household. and the school and the community. It was just about people who were respectful to one another, who were law abiding, who really embraced and enjoyed the value of community, right? And we all lived in a area of Long Island where you walk to school. So when I'm walking to school with other members from my block, there were kids from other blocks that would eventually, merge onto one block that we all kind of like walk together as we were going into the school. And that's the kind of like community that I lived and I really enjoyed and I miss. And we've kind of like gotten away from that. But anyway, in the book, I mentioned how I lived in a community where there were families and single homes, and we all so like came out and played with one another. We enjoyed each other, you know, the Millers, the Manigaults, the Hogans, the Williams, the Robinsons, the Schambergers. I can see these parents and see these houses as I'm talking to you now, and these are the people who made up my community, my immediate community. And there was no unsafety there. We lived in a community where it was expected and okay to go into a neighbor's home and have lunch, or if your parents were running just a little bit behind for maybe working, maybe have dinner. And no one worried that, okay, well, what's going to happen to Roger? What's going to happen to Philip? Or what's going to happen to Manigault, to Wayne? It was never that kind of environment. It was environment, well, okay, if Philip is over the Robinsons' homes, it's a true story. I had a I had a neighbor, right, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, right? And they were the kind of family where if my mom had to go out and couldn't be home when I got home from school, I was instructed to go over to Mrs. Robinson's home, and Mrs. Robinson would make a sandwich and let me have something to drink, and would basically be a caretaker for me until my mom got home. And it was no question from my mother, Mrs. Robinson, where's Philip? How's he doing? Yada, yada, yada. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was like, okay, Philip is over Mrs. Robinson's house. He's safe. She's safe. I don't have anything to worry about. I can go ahead and take care of my business. And that's how life was for me. And so in the book, I talk about those innocent yet days of excellence, right? Because every family had similar values, right? We all worked. We went to school. Parents worked. We came home. We played together. We worked hard, And one of the stories that I can remember is the men in the community wanted to do various home improvement projects. So one of the projects that Mr. Robinson, Mr. Williams, my father, and Mr. Miller decided to do was to put down new concrete in the walkways. So driveways, the walkway, the sidewalk, those three areas of concrete needed to be repaved. So what did we do? The men and the male children worked with one another to first go in Mr. Robinson's house and do his, and then came over to Mr. Williams. And once we finished Mr. Williams, then we move over to my house, and then we finished with Mr. Miller. And it was no question as to you owe me this or I did that. It was community. It made sense that it seemed logical for us to work with one another because we played with one another, we grew up around one another, and we were on the same block. And to see the men of the household working with one another sort of like began to build, if you will, the image of what I ultimately began to do. And I write about it in my book, Relentless Excellence. And I invite you to go to my website, philliphogan.com. That's PhillipHogan.com. And there you learn about, some of the other accomplishments that I've achieved, and also read an excerpt for the book, Relentless Excellence, a story of family, business building, and value leadership. And, also subscribe to our waiting list. And we'd be happy to reply to you in regard to where we are with publishing the book, where you can find it, how much is it going to cost, and all those kind of things. And therefore, we want you to be a part of this Relentless Excellence community that we have approached. We have approached as a result of me taking suggestion of someone who simply wanted me to appear as a guest on his podcast. So until our next episode, you stay tuned, and thank you for following us. Please continue to follow our content, like, share, and comment. Bye now. Thanks for tuning in to the Closing Market Weekly. If you found this episode valuable, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone in the industry. For more insights from the front lines of real estate closings, we'll see you next week.